Thank you for joining us today at the Chai Academy, a daily podcast by yours truly, Yaakov Sachs, Rabbi Sachs, coming to you live from the Chai Center, located in Dix Hills. Each class is independent of one another, so therefore it's not like the Netflix series where you have to, it's each class is separate. We're going into the holiday of Purim, and we have been discussing some interesting stuff and insights, things you would not learn in Hebrew school over the past few days. And today is just continuing on that theme. So the title for today is Esther versus Kissinger. Right? Queen Esther versus Kissinger. Who is the better diplomat? We're going to go through a fascinating tour of things you don't think about when you read the Megillah, obvious questions, and you'll see the brilliance here. So we all know Henry Kissinger was a tremendous diplomat, and he was wise, and he got a lot of things accomplished. If you would ask him, not enough. And there's a story that he tells when he was once asked, "What is a diplomat?" So he said, "Well, let me tell you a story." He says, I flew to Russia, and I flew to the outskirts of Moscow in some little village, and I stopped a young man, and I asked him, "Are you single?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Would you like to get married?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Would you like to marry an American?" He goes, "Well, I'm Russian, and they're conversing. I don't think it's going to work. But how about if I tell you she's Rothschild's daughter?" She goes, "Rothschild's daughter? That is amazing. Of course, I'm in." So from there, he flies to Switzerland, and he meets with a bank. And he said, "I understand you're looking for a new executive in the bank, someone in the higher echelons of this bank. Would you hire a Russian peasant?" And they said, "Absolutely not." He says, "Well, what if I would tell you that he is Rothschild's son-in-law? He married the daughter of Rothschild." They said, "That's it. That's all we need to hear. Completely different scenario. He's not just a typical Russian peasant." So he flies back to the United States, and he meets with Rothschild, and he says, "I have a proposal for your daughter." The fellow's originally from Russia, and but he's the president of a Swiss bank. So Rothschild says, "Absolutely, consider it done." He says, "Let's call in our daughter. Let's call in my daughter." So he calls in the daughter, and he says to her, "I know, we're advanced somewhat than we used to be, but I have this great shidduch, this great date for you, and I think it's somebody who you really like, and he's the president of this huge bank in Switzerland." So she goes, "I'm not interested in marrying a banker. I have no interest in marrying a banker." He says, "No, but this is..." She goes, No ifs and buts." So Kissinger steps in and goes, "He may be a banker, but his background is very humble. He comes from Russia. He's a peasant, and he knows how to farm. He knows that he's not your typical banker." She goes, "Okay, that's an interesting fellow. Yeah, him I'll gladly meet." And that's the story of how Rothschild's daughter married a Russian peasant who became a Swiss banker. So that was Kissinger's story. So he was able. The idea is not that he did it; it's fictitious, but you're able to manipulate things to a certain outcome. So now let's delve into the Megillah. So we know the story is that the wicked Haman tried to plotted, diabolical plot to kill the Jewish people. In some twist of fate, the queen was Jewish, albeit nobody knew. Her uncle, she was an orphan, her uncle Mordechai, the hero of the story, he told her, "Don't tell a soul. It's dangerous for you to tell a soul." And anyway, and Ahasuerus chose her. The king chose her out of thousands of girls. He had his pick. He had He had 127 provinces. Can you imagine? We have 50 states in the United States. Can you imagine he had 127? There's got to be some good choice there, right? He chose Esther. And Esther's the queen. And she lived as a queen for 5 years. 5 years into her queenship, the spaghetti hit the fan. And where Haman wanted to kill the Jewish people, Mordechai met with her. He was her uncle. And he said, you got to do something. You got to do something. So she goes, he hasn't called me into his royal room, the palace, the throne room. It goes, you can't just enter the throne room. If you do, and you get killed, you get beheaded. Just think of Henry VIII. So he said, hey, honey bunch, there's a reason you were chosen to be queen. You need to go in there. And whether it makes sense to you or not, and that's the reason, by the way, why many people drink on Purim, because Purim doesn't have to make sense. Whether it makes sense to you or not, you got to go in there and you got to beg for your life, beg for your people's life. Tell them that it's your family's life that it's at stake. And Esther said, okay, I'll go in. I'll do as you say, Mordechai. And if I perish, I perish. Mordechai was not only her uncle, Mordechai was the head of the Jewish people in exile. The temple was destroyed, the first temple. It was destroyed by the Babylonians. And Jews were exiled, and they were exiled to Babylon, Iraq. Many Jews made it to Iran. And this story took place in Iran. Thousands upon thousands of Jews in Iraq and Iran, because that's where they were dragged to Syria a little bit, but Iraq and Iran is where they sort of had quasi-freedom, and they weren't slaves per se. But they were kicked out of Israel, the land of Israel. So he was on the Sanhedrin. Mordechai was the head of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the supreme court of the Jews. 71 judges. The United States has 9. 70, even though they want to pack the court, so maybe there'll be 71. But 71 judges in the Sanhedrin, and the leader has a special position. If you're the head of the Sanhedrin, you have the last word in anything. So Mordechai met with her, and he said, beg by the king. Beg. So the greatest rabbi of the time tells you to do it. She goes, sir, yes, sir. And she risks her life, and she opens the door to this room where she doesn't know that this is the last few moments of her life, or at least freedom, jail, then beheading. And she walks in, and the king stretches forth his scepter as a sign of welcome. She touches the top of the scepter, and he goes, my darling queen, what can I do for you? It's such a surprise to see you. What can I do for you? Half of my kingdom. Esther, whatever you ask, up to half of my kingdom, it's yours. So Esther responded. Remember the instructions of Mordechai. Mordechai told her, beg. Go on, bend the knee and beg. And she goes, my dear king, my husband, my love, my sweetie, my honey bunch, I would like to invite you to dinner. You and me. So the king says, wow, I would love that, Esther. A romantic evening, and which will clearly end up to be a great night. And he says, of course. She goes, and I want to invite Haman, your vizier, your prime minister. So Ahasuerus raised his eyebrow, and she goes, so you want to have a romantic evening with me, Haman, and you? She goes, that is my request. So he goes, go. Prepare the meal. Tell them to prepare the meal. Tell them to prepare my prime minister, Haman, the wicked Haman, the one who designed, who invented, who orchestrated who is behind this diabolical plot to kill the Jewish people. Go! So they went to Haman, and they said, you got to be at the palace in 2.5 hours because you're having dinner, a private, intimate evening with the king and queen. Why did she do that? Why did she do that? Why didn't she beg? He said to her, half the kingdom I'll give you. Half the kingdom. Why didn't she beg? And look what she asked instead. Haman was the Hitler of his time. A rabid individual who was obviously clearly deranged, and he was just hateful and spiteful and could care less about human beings, humanity. He was the furthest thing from a humanitarian. Dinosaurs were probably more humanitarian than him. Why did she invite him? How do you invite Hitler to a feast? And the Talmud says that when people found out that Haman was invited to a private feast with the king and queen, they were really petrified, because Hitler is going to get more power. And she invited him. And she invited him and the queen. Now, the beginning of the Megillah perhaps gives us an answer and insight as to what was going on and how she was the master manipulator. So, the beginning of the Megillah, it tells us it was the 3rd year of the king's reign, and the king was the anniversary. He decided to make a feast for the princes, the noble people, the upper echelons, the first class people, the top class, the highest, the VIPs of his kingdom, of his fiefdom. And he made it for 180 days. It was this debauchery. It was drunk. It was orgies. It was delicacies. And for 180 days he did this. He partied for 180 days. Right? How long is Mardi Gras? Right? 180 days he partied. It's almost like, San Francisco. Partied. I'm sure there were drugs. There was girls. There was this, that, and the other. And after 180 days, you would think that he would not now sign himself up to rehab, to the Betty Ford Clinic. Right? He's a drunkard old fool. And if he was old, he was definitely drunkard. And he was a tippish. There was something wrong with him. He was as you'll hear. And then he said, okay, I invite the entire capital city, New York City. I invite for 7 days, 24/7 for a week. I invite them to a party. So not only did he not stop drinking, he continued drinking. It's a problem with alcoholics. And and there were hundreds of thousands of people, the entire capital city. I don't know if it had 1 million people. I have no idea. And they came, and the Megillah tells us that it was decadence, and it was opulent, and there was a purple, there was leather, and there was this, and paintings, and so. And then the Megillah says something very, very telling. And he says that this last 7 days, he did it lasois kirtsoin ish v'ish. He was a people pleaser. Whatever the people wanted, whatever they wanted, they got. He wanted to cater to their every whim, so they would like him. Moving further on in the Megillah, when Haman approached him, and Haman said, it was very, very vague. So keep that in mind. Very, very vague. And Haman approached him and said, there is a people that just no good. They separate from everybody, and it's not worth your while to keep them. And he says, so what? He says, let's kill him. He said, okay. I mean, he was so flippant. He was so weak. The Talmud discusses it. And the great rabbi in the Talmud, he says, Achashverosh lacked a backbone. The king of Persia was a weak man. He basically, he wherever the wind blew, that's where he fell. He was a weak man, extremely weak. Not only was he weak, but he needed to be loved. He was very insecure. Not only was he insecure, says the Talmud, he was paranoid. He was always careful. He had the food tasters, and he had the guards, and he kept himself, like almost like a Putin is doing now. But so he was, he was very isolated, and he was very careful. And the only reason why he had this party was because he felt very insecure, and he wanted to gain more friends. Right? Keep your enemies closer, type of thing. So he said, yeah, sure, kill him. He didn't even ask who. He said, kill him. You want to kill him, kill him. He's the type of guy. They tell a story about a rabbi who he was mediating a case. Two partners came before him, and one partner says, this is my claim. The defendant said, this is my claim because he stole from me X and X amount of money. And the rabbi says, wow, that's terrible. I'm sorry that happened to you. You're right to bring it here, and you have a good case. Now it came the plaintiff's chance. The plaintiff said, well, it's not so simple, And the rabbi looked at him and says, you're absolutely right. You have a good case back, and he doesn't have such a good case. And it went back and forth. You're right, and you're right, and you're right, and you're right. Finally, his wife, the rabbi's wife, could stand it no longer. She came in and she said, honey, they can't both be right. And it's impossible. Two people can't be right. One's right, one's wrong. This is what mediation is. Unless you compromise. But you cannot say to both people you're right. So he looks at her and he goes, you're right. That's the type of person Achashverosh was. The last person that spoke to him is what he did and he thought of. So Esther, she played Achashverosh right into her hands by inviting her having a romantic evening with her husband, with the king, and inviting someone else started to plague Achashverosh, started to torment him. Why? Are they having an affair? They've gotten so cushy here. They're so close lately. I think I noticed that. Are they trying to upset me? Are they trying to kill me? Are they trying to coup? What's going on here? What's going on? Now, so if we would put Achashverosh on a shrink's couch, we would say he was insecure, lacked backbone, and weak. That was his weakness. That was who he was, and she played him. What about Haman? So Haman, the Megillah tells us, early on in the Megillah, tells us that Haman was furious because he was the prime minister, right? He was the second in command. He was one of the knights of the Round Table. He sat up to the right of the king, the most prominent position. And it was the law of the land. I don't know if it was or he made it the law of the land that whenever the king walked, you had to bow down to the king, bend the knee. And whenever Haman walked, he wanted people to bend the knee. There was one single solitary person that would not bow. And you know who that was? The Megillah tells us it was Mordechai, the head of the Sanhedrin. He goes, I don't bow to anybody. I'm sorry. I just don't bow to anybody. And Haman, because of his overly sized ego, sense of self, right? He got furious. He got deranged. He was mad. And he became insane. He became so full. He was so hot and bothered that he went to his wife and goes, I can't stand him. I hate him. Right? Mordechai was a citizen. Right? I can't stand him. So him and his wife says, yeah, kill him. Ask the king to kill him. Now, Haman said, well, that's easy. Whoever I want the king to kill, I just got to ask. Right? So the Talmud discusses what's going on here. One guy doesn't bow to him, and he He gets all bent out of shape. Meanwhile, millions do bow to him. What's wrong with him? To let Mordechai rent space in his brain and rent free. Right? For free. What's wrong with this guy? So the Talmud tells us it's no different than Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, God said you can eat every single fruit of every tree in the Garden of Eden. Just this one tree don't. And they couldn't. They said, well, one tree. Right? I'm going to eat from that tree. Don't tell me what to do. One tree. So the parallel here is one man. He was crazed. He was so egomaniacal. He had such an inflated sense of self that he was unable to forgive and forget Mordechai's trespass. And he said, I gotta be rid of him. I got to be rid of him. He's gotta die. I gotta hang this guy in a tree so everybody can see this is what happens when you don't bow down to me. Esther invited this egomaniac to a meal. She pumped his ego. He went and told his wife, you have no idea what happened here. I'm invited with the king and queen. Nobody else, just us. Now, maybe he didn't have to think too much. He was just elated over the moon. But Megillah tells us at the meal, they're sitting together, right? Haman, he's just full of self-importance. He can't believe his luck that he's creme de la creme of society. And he's sitting with Esther, and he's smiling, and everybody's toasting, and it's a beautiful evening. And finally, Achashverosh, who's unnerved, he's not happy, he's not comfortable, turns to Esther and says, Esther, my darling, my queen, my love, my sugar, my honey bunch, what do you want? Up to half of the kingdom. I told you, what do you want? Right? So she said, if it will please the king, I would like to invite you both to another meal tomorrow night. Now, the first time she told him, I'd like to make a meal, invite the king, singularly, and Haman was secondary. This time, the Megillah changes it for one word. I'd like to invite you both. This absolutely drove the king bonkers. Oh my goodness. Now I'm on equal footing with this Haman. You know, yesterday she invited me. She used singular loy. Please, if it pleases the king, I'd like to invite him. Right now she says them. Right. He was losing it. But what could he say? Now it's interesting that chapter 5 is where she invites the king for the first time. Chapter 7 is where they have the meal for the second time. Chapter 6, which according to some opinions in the Megillah, is where the miracle starts. What was the miracle? So, what was the story? Chapter 6 begins, Ba'layla hahu, on that night, the night after he had that first meal with Esther and Haman, Nodedosh Nas HaMelech, the king had insomnia. Who cares? Who cares? I have insomnia every night. Who cares he has insomnia? Right? So, I never get REM. So you didn't get REM one night. Right? What's going on here? And that's the beginning of the miracle. So perhaps now we can understand that why didn't he sleep? Why didn't he sleep? The reason why he didn't sleep, because he was stressed out. Oh my goodness, what just happened here? She loves me not. She loves me not. He wants to kill me, she wants to kill me. They want to do this, they want to do that. A coup, they want to change laws. Oh my goodness, they're going to find some flaw in my, my pedigree. What's going on? He couldn't sleep. The next day, after a sleepless night, you can imagine how irritable he was. Didn't sleep the whole night. King is usually pampered. Right, so he was in his Egyptian cotton sheets, right? With and there was lavender diffuser in the air, and he couldn't sleep. He could not sleep. They brought him gold-plated melatonin, nothing. He was irritable. He was just irritable. And now there's the second thing. So he's sitting there now, and he's on edge. He's on pins and needles. He is ripe for Esther to do her damage. Ripe. If Esther would have begged him, as Mordechai said, he may have, he may not have. Also, he was a misogynist. So we know he killed his first queen. The Megillah tells us the story. There's no reason to tell us the story. But he killed the first queen because she bothered him. She wouldn't listen to him. She argued with him. And he killed her. Right? Can you imagine you kill your spouse every time you have an argument? This is I mean, just insane. I mean, he was an OJ. So he may not have, and he may have gotten angry at her. Don't tell me what to do, right? But here, he was completely. He could not sit. He was, his knees were shaking, and he was right, and he could barely eat. And he turns to her and said, "Esther, what is it you want? Half the kingdom, I've told you. What is it you want?" Right? So she says, I want to tell you some very bad news. He goes, "Oh, I knew it. I know what's going on here." And she said, "Someone's trying to kill me." He goes, "What?" "Yeah, someone's trying to kill me and my whole family and my people." Now he's her family, right? And my people and he goes, "What on earth? Who is trying to kill you?" And she points to this guy, Haman, who, because of his ego, did not pick up any warning signs. Why did she invite me again? The first time I get, the second time? Why invite me again? What's going on here? Instead of him being nervous, right? He was man-spreading, and he was smoking a cigar, a cubie, and he was just, a fat cat, happiest thing in the world. He had no clue, because of his ego, what was about to come down on him. And she said, this man, he dropped his cigar, and he goes, "What?" And the king said, "How dare you?" Remember, the king's on edge, sleepless, already knew something was up. The king ran outside to get a cigarette. Calm down. Haman made probably the last mistake of his life. So there were plenty that preceded it. He went over to Esther, and she was laying down as the royalty do. When they lay, think of Caesar, the emperor, eating grapes. They're laying. So she was laying down on her mittah, as it says, on her bed, and he leaned over her, begging her, "Please, please, he's going to kill me, he's going to kill me, he's going to kill me." Achashverosh walks in. What does he see? He sees a person, right, all over his wife. And he says these words, which the sages interpret two ways. Hagam lichboish es ishti imi baboyes. You want to lay with my wife in the palace? Right? And Chavoina comes in the right moment, and hears the king screaming, and Chavoina says, I hear, we have a tree outside, we can hang him. It was prepared for someone else, Mordechai, but the king said, hang him, just take him away and hang him. The sages say, Hagam lichboish es ishti imi baboyes, is that, Haman had been feeding Achashverosh's insecurity. Right? He'd been feeding him a tail. They say that Stalin had the head of the KGB was Beria. Right? Beria was the head of the KGB, and Stalin trusted him. But historians say that Beria, how did he get Stalin to trust him, is because he fabricated stories to this insecure Stalin, and then rectified these stories so Stalin was indebted to him. And Beria lasted a long time. Most people didn't last a long time. I mean, Stalin's own kid could care less about it. If you read the history, right, when Germany caught Stalin's kid, and nobody, he made lists every day in his PJs. This one killed this one, killed this one. He had a day of killing Jewish doctors, which he died before then on Purim. Stalin died on Purim. So he realized, the king realized, this guy's was never out for my good. He was trying to kill my wife, trying to lay with my wife, and they say, by the way, historians say that yes, Stalin had some type of a stroke, but they're not sure, did Beria poison him or not, right? So the king is saying, this man is poison. He's been playing with my life. Anyway, they hung him. And then she goes over to the king and says, what do you want, Esther? Half the kingdom. He goes, kill his sons. They're evil, they're wicked. So they hung the 10 sons. Then he says, what else? What else? So she says, could you take back the decree? And that's when he said, well, I can't take back the decree, but I can, the Jews are allowed to defend themselves, the generals will step down, and I can't actually take back the decree once it's written. Anyway, the war fell apart, and the Jews were saved. So she was a master at this. She manipulated Achashverosh. She manipulated Haman, and she got exactly what she wanted. She got exactly what she planned. You tell me. How brilliant was this woman? How brilliant. She used her womanly ingenuity, and she played both of them against each other. His fickle weakness, paranoid, right, with low self-worth against this animal, this egomaniac. And now you know the rest of the story. So the king, the question is, why could not the king revoke the decree? The king says, it's in the Megillah, the king says, it's the law of the land. Once a decree is signed, it cannot be revoked. Once it's went out to the masses, it cannot be revoked. It's bad policy. You don't change the Constitution, right? You don't change. You can add things to it, but you don't change the Constitution. So that was almost like a constant. You add to it, you can't take it away. It's so easy. But he said, however, I'll give you arms. You can defend yourself. You know, my army won't be involved, etc. So it became more of a fair fight. So if you enjoyed this, please feel free to share. When you listen to the Megillah tonight at 7:30 at the Chai Center, I think over the past few days we've discussed quite a bit about the story of Purim. Please share it. Please tell others. If you wish to see classes, if this is your, you haven't been on before, or you're seeing something like this for the first time, or you need a reminder, it's thechaicenter.com/academy. There's 350 classes plus where you could learn and glean. God bless. Happy Purim, and remember, we're all on a journey. Right? God dictated Esther's journey. God dictated Mordechai's journey. And they had no clue. She was 5 years, she was a queen, without having any insight as to what was going to happen, why she was chosen, why God tortured her like this. That she sat with Hitler and ended up bombing him. And in the end, killing him. And ending this diabolical decree. God bless. Be well.